welcome to the February North End Clinic. I'm Lisa Murray. Today, our guest speaker is Greg Wright, and he chairs our Olympia Clinic, and he is going to present pictures from his trip of riding the Rocky Mountaineer went on his trip to Utah and Colorado this past November.
This clinic goes along with a clinic that was done in December by Brian Ferris for Olympia. He previewed slides from his trip to Colorado and New Mexico to ride the tourist railroads down there, the Denver and Rio Grande and the Cumbres and Toltec and a number of other railroads. So I'm following up with a presentation on riding the more established tourist luxury lines. And the reason I did this is because got the opportunity, a friend told me that the Rocky Mountaineer had opened up in the United States. And since you couldn't go do the Rocky Mountaineer in Canada right now, I thought we'd give it a try. My wife's not necessarily a train fan, but she was interested in going on this trip. And we had a great time. It's a little different experience. I'll try to share some of that with you, and I'll prove to you that she had a good time because I have the pictures to prove it. But you may want to think about a trip like this for someone that's not necessarily into the grease and the grime that you might want to see at the engine house, but still having a beautiful train ride and some beautiful scenery and getting to see a few things. You may have known about the Rocky Mountaineer. It runs in Canada out of British Columbia. Beautiful scenery there and incredible service. They're all about taking good care of the people on their train. And they opened up this trip from Moab to Denver, or Denver to Moab. You get to choose which way you want to go. So a friend of mine from Puyallup had taken the trip. He mentioned it to me. I hadn't heard of it yet. I immediately looked into it and found out that they had some availability. We rode it in November of this last year. So we did the Moab to Denver route via Salt Lake City. And we took a side trip to Arches National Park. So made for a nice 4 or 5 day event. And let me go through and show you how that worked out for us. So the way this trip starts is Rocky Mountaineer, you get to Salt Lake City, and from that point on, they take care of you. And they take care of you very nicely. So first thing we did, we checked into a hotel that they had arranged. We spent the night in Salt Lake City. Next morning, hopped on the bus here, brand new multi-passenger bus, beautiful, a very knowledgeable driver. And he drove us from Salt Lake City down to Moab, about 4 hours or so leisurely drive. Some interesting scenery on the way. Saw part of the rail line, not the part that we were on, but we got to see that. But this guy knew what he was talking about. And so the first thing he says is, we're about to pull into Moab. He said, we're ahead of time. Would you like to go see some petroglyphs? And everybody on the bus said, well, we're here to see and do sightseeing. Let's see the petroglyphs. So down this little narrow road, he takes this giant bus. And sure enough, here's the sign that says petroglyphs. And if you look really closely in the dark part of the rock here, you can see the petroglyphs. Now, to make it a little easier, I've put some arrows in here. So right there are some figures of, looks like people. There's 3 of them. Here's a whole bunch of people standing together. And over there, a little harder to see, there's some ferns. There were animals. There were all sorts of things, not really carved into the rock, not very deep, but deep enough that it made these forms that have been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years on the side of this cliff. And they're up high. They're not down at ground level. They're up high. So the people that put these in here worked very hard to get them on the cliffside. And so it was a nice little piece of scenery that we didn't expect to see on our way down there. Then the bus driver proceeded to turn the great big bus around in the middle of the road without falling into the river on one side or crashing into the cliff on the other side. So we were all very impressed. And then he took us on to Moab. So I told you we went together. I wanted to prove that my wife had a good time riding trains. So I have a picture over here. We are now in Arches National Park. So Arches National Park is about 2 miles north of Moab. And it goes on I'm not sure exactly how many square miles, but it is gorgeous scenery. And we had the afternoon free, so it wasn't part of the Rocky Mountain trip, but with our free time, we were able to get a tour of the Arches National Park. Fortunately, the person that runs the tour worked in Moab for 30 years before retiring just to do the outdoor adventure. And one of the things he does, along with biking and hiking, is give these tours. And he had the names and the descriptions of all these interesting rock formations that we're going to see here in a few minutes. We were there November 2nd. A week before we got there, the summer crowd was still in place, and it took 45 minutes of wait time just to get into Arches National Park. And we were able to drive right in a 12-passenger bus and get this view. So nice shirt sleeve day, November 2nd. It's very comfortable to be out and walk around. And we wore our masks when in the bus, but as soon as we got out, we were able to take them off and enjoy the beautiful scenery. So it's called Arches for a reason. It's full of these arches. So right there is an arch. And an arch is formed when the rainwater falls and percolates down to the rock, and it starts eroding a hole. And the hole gets bigger and bigger until you create this arch. Eventually the arch goes away, but because it erodes away, but these arches are everywhere. And the way it's just set up, you can walk up the trail right to the arch, right into the arch, and take a look at it. So that's quite interesting. And beautiful colors. These reds and whites are the different layers of sandstones down there that give you that beautiful coloring, and we're going to see a lot of that. You also get all of these monuments. They're called hoodoos, and as the rock weathers in different ways, or there's a fracture, you start seeing these things appear over geologic time. And they're all over the place. And if you look really close at them, a lot of them have faces or figures that you can see, and people have named them all. And our guide knew the names of all of them. And sure enough, he would say, that looks like King Tut. And he'd point it out, and by gosh, we could see King Tut in there. So a fascinating place to go through, and acres of these red rocks. The different layers eroded at different rates. So there's a white layer right there, this red layer on top and the bottom, and this white layer erodes faster, and you get stones like this, literally perched. They don't look like they should stand, but they do. And you can walk right up. There's trails around these. You can walk right up and look at them. Just hope there's no earthquake or anything while you happen to be there. The other thing that happens in a place like this is as the sun moves across the sky, the view changes. So now we're into the evening, and we're getting the sun from behind me where I took this picture and I'm looking east at these rock walls, and they just jump out at you with different colors as the sun changes. So Red Rocks is a beautiful place to visit. The size and scope is difficult to pick up. So if you look right there, a little white dot, that's a person. This thing is huge. It's mammoth. I'm multiple 100 yards away, as you can see. What's fascinating is this is a natural amphitheater. I could hear the people that were standing down here talking as if they were right next to me. So the sound was coming out all the way out to where I was back in here. Just a really beautiful place to spend an afternoon. And the sun went down at Moab. It got a little bit chilly. We got back in the bus. We went to town, had dinner that night, and then get up the next morning and start our rail trip. So here's the map of Rockies to the Red Rocks. We were down here in Moab. Here's Arches National Park. It's about 10 miles up here to where we get on the train, and we take the train to the east all the way across. We stop at Glenwood Springs the first night because you don't sleep on the train. So if you slept on the train, you'd miss all the beautiful scenery. And then we continued on from Glenwood Springs onto Denver the next day. The Mountaineer are very famous about taking good care of people. When I've seen the programs that they do. They have a beautiful ceremony when the train starts out in Vancouver, British Columbia. This is the first year of this group down in the United States. So some of the things aren't quite as fancy yet, but they're working hard. Whoops, went too far. So there's where we got on the train. Yes, it was a gravel parking lot, but they did hold the flags, and they did the best they could to put on a show. They haven't built a station on either end yet for people to board and dismount the train, but I'm guessing that that's some of the things that are in their plans as this continues to progress forward. So we are on this line that's just north of Moab. It goes up to the I-70 corridor and connects to the main there. The tracks actually go all the way to the outskirts of Moab, but what's happening at the outskirts of Moab is that they're removing tailings from an old mill that has radioactive tailings there, low-level radioactive tailings, and dumping it into train cars, and they're taking it north and disposing of it up a ways. So not a great place to have a railroad station right at Moab. The track doesn't actually come into Moab. So this is what they've decided to do, is they've set this place up. So our bus takes us from the motel. We park. The people from Rocky Mountaineer are there ready for us, and they put on the show as we get on the train. Here's what the inside of the train looks like. These were 1950s vintage running gear, they told me, that they basically stripped from the floor. They left the floor and the running gear in place, upgraded all the running gear, and built these cars on top of it. And they are gorgeous. Think first-class airline seats, leather upholstery, these giant fold-down trays, like 2 or 3 times bigger than what you get on an airplane, and sturdy. And this aisle here is about 3.5, 4 feet wide. So the airplane cart that you're used to seeing was they go up and down the aisles. That's how they served us here, but you could still walk around either side of the cart as they came through. They did not put dining car on this. I think probably as part of the COVID precautions, they served you at your seat, but they figured out how to do that and do it very nicely. And they did not have dome cars on the American route, because the dome cars won't fit through all the tunnels. And so they are working with the UP now to decide if they should build some lower size dome cars, or if they could maybe open up the tunnels. And I'm not sure how many tunnels that would be, but we went through a lot of them. What's nice about these cars is a great big side window, so you can see what's going on. And then halfway up the roof is a rolled glass window, so you can see up and out. And critical because of the way the scenery is here to be able to see up and out. And you'll see that here in a minute. So there's looking in the car, plenty of room. You know, they were being careful with COVID restrictions. We were being careful. They weren't crowded in there. There were about 8 cars on the train. Interestingly, we really didn't see the other people in the other cars. There wasn't a lot of walking through the different cars, but a nice sized trip. You could get up and walk anytime you wanted, including to the vestibules, and take pictures out the windows. So it was very enjoyable, very well done. There's looking backwards from where we're sitting. The people look a little bit close together here, but there's about 6 or 8 feet between each seat back. So you have plenty of leg room and plenty of space to get around. There you can see our parking lot. There's our buses that we got there in to start our trip. You can see how those upper windows make it real easy to see what's going on. If you didn't have those upper windows, you wouldn't get nearly as good a view. Each car has a Rocky Mountaineer docent or 2 in them. They know the story of all the different rocks and buildings and ghost towns and waterfalls and whatever you go by, they're able to describe it. This crew gets on at Denver. They spent the day and a half getting to Moab, and then we got on at Moab to go back. So they do a 3-day turnaround, and they get to know the route very well. The engineers, they break at Glenwood, or no, at Grand Junction. They switch engineers because they have rules on how long they can be running the train. But this crew gets to stay with us the whole time. So there's our group. This lady did most of the talking. This was like his first or second trip. He was learning the ropes. I'm sorry, this lady did most of the talking here. As you can see, she's got the microphone. He's learning the ropes, and this person did a lot of the serving. So up and down this aisle, they took great care of us, as you'll see here in just a minute. Those are the meals that they provided the first night at our tray. But this is no simple tray. You fold down your tray, they put a folded napkin on it. They keep your drinks full. They are back and forth constantly taking care of you. So I think this was a pork dish and this was a beef dish that we had. They did a very nice job. It started out with appetizers. It goes to a main course and finishes up with a dessert with whatever you would like to drink. And they do a nice job of it. I'm assuming they prepared on the train, although I was never able to figure that out exactly. I don't know if it's partly prepared and then they put it together, but these came out on those airplane-like carts, and they served us one car at a time. Again, brand new, so they haven't got everything set up the way they want it yet. They are leasing power from Union Pacific for 2021. They did put some yellow vinyl on the side of the UP engine here and got a Rocky Mountaineer logoing on it. You'll see here in a minute. Their cars are fully painted for the Rocky Mountaineer, just like the cars up in Canada. And they've got their motive power will be there next year. It just didn't get it done in time for this year's season. There's a little more close-up of the Union Pacific engine that was pulling us. You can see they put the plastic vinyl-y sheet on here of yellow and then the Rocky Mountaineer over the top so that it looks like their locomotive. Here's our locomotive engineer right here. He worked for Amtrak for a number of years before he took this job with Rocky Mountaineer. Says he's having a great time. Here's proof that I wasn't the nerdiest train guy on there. This guy had all the patches on his hat and his jacket and his vest, and he was younger than me. So I felt really good. I wasn't the youngest person on the trip, and I wasn't the biggest railroad nerd on the trip, although I guess that would have been okay. So this is just north of Moab. This is kind of what we start in, this deserty looking landscape, short scrubby grass, red rocks in the background, not too tall yet. This is a fairly shallow valley, but things are going to change a lot as we head north. We, after about 20 miles, joined the UP mainline. There was some maintenance work going on. We saw some Amtrak traffic. We saw some freight traffic. It's single track mainline with not a lot of passing sidings. So the dispatchers had to do a good job to keep us moving, traveling against most of the trains that we saw, at least during the day. We're starting to go into a canyon here. We're going to see multiple red rock style canyons, and we're going to get right up close to these rock walls as we go. We're starting to make our way into the first canyon. You can see there is a siding, but it's full of ballast hoppers right now, so not a lot of places to put the extra train. There you can see us just making our way along. Nice sunny afternoon. 5 different canyons that we're going to go through as we make through this trip. All of them have a river running down through them. Some of the canyons have roads, and about, I think 3 of the 5 do not have any road access. So you're getting to see stuff that you would never see along I-70. Fascinating rock formations. I have a geology background, so it was great to see all these different rock formations. Just quickly, you can see there's one type of sandstone here. There's a different type of sandstone here. They erode differently over time, and you get these different layers showing up in these vistas. Water and wind both erode some of these things, and you'll get the different styles of rock outcroppings. One of the more spectacular views with the reds and the whites This is the stuff you'll see if you go down into the Grand Canyon. It goes all the way up into southern Idaho. These sandstones that were deposited through here are just fascinating. And then as the erosion cut open the ground, you get to see these vistas. You get a scrub pine coverage over a lot of them. You get a sagebrush, and then grasses down here. I was surprised to see a bit of farming at different places along the way, cattle pastures, sheep pastures, and that sort of thing. But these are beautiful outcroppings all the way along on the trip. I said that we get really close. Well, yeah, we get really close, and we're going to get even closer. So there has to be rock fence protection, and there were miles and miles of rock fence. So basically what you've got here are wires that run parallel to the track. And if a rock comes rolling down and breaks the wire or pulls out the plugs, it causes a signal to go red, and that stops the train so that we don't run into the rock and derail. If the rock falls and breaks any of these wires, it does the same thing. So these rock fences are used in lots of places, including in the Pacific Northwest. My dad was a signal maintainer for the Northern Pacific and the Southern and the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle before they all merged into the BN. And he used to have to take care of rock fences. And one night when I was in college, he was called out to go take care of some rock fences miles and miles away from home. We lived in Pasco, and we ended up down somewhere along the Columbia River in the dark on a motor car and went out to find the broken wire because the dispatcher had called the maintenance person, who called my dad and said, "Hey, I hear you're covering for maintainer so-and-so." Well, Dad didn't know that. He thought he was only covering for one maintainer, but he was actually covering for 3 other maintainers that night. And down we went, and we found the broken wire, fixed the broken wire, the signal turns back green, and the train is able to proceed. Next train's able to proceed. So here's a schematic of what a rock fence looks like. If the rock hits this wire mesh, it pulls this plug, and that opens the circuit and causes the signal to go. So you can go back in and repair it, plug it back in, the signal will go back to green. Those wires that were overhead, if they break, you have to climb up the pole with your spikes and your belt and repair the wire in the middle of the night. Not a lot of fun. It was not one of my dad's favorite things to do. I thought it was great because I got to go and ride the motor car. This is the route that Amtrak runs. So we were put in the hole so Amtrak could come by at about 50, 60 miles an hour. So yes, they see the same scenery, but no, they don't see it the same as you get to see it on the Rocky Mountaineer. So I was very impressed how quickly they came by. It would be a fun ride, but it wouldn't be nearly the same. I told you there weren't a lot of sightings. We were making our way east, and we came upon a sighting that already had a long freight train in it, and this Amtrak train was coming from the east to the west. So the dispatcher was thinking ahead, had us go past the sighting. The crew hopped out through the switch. We backed into the sighting because we were a short train and there was still a little bit of room so that Amtrak could go by, and then we could continue on our way. Had they not been able to do that with us, we'd have been waiting a long time back down by Moab and not got the ride that we were hoping for. As the train runs up these valleys, sometimes you're on the east or the north side of the river, and sometimes you're on the south side. Again, the rocks change based on how the sun is hitting them. So we switched over to the other side now, and we're getting this view. And we're a little bit farther away from the cliff now, but you can see out both sides of the car and really see these different things. Here's one of those rocks that has a name. I don't remember the name of all the rocks, but you can see the wide valley that the river has carved down here. The rocks up here, hundreds and hundreds of feet up to the top of that pinnacle. There's a little view of our train, the 2 UP engines I talked about, and about half of the cars that are on the train. Here's another view. We've gone to the other side of the river now. Here's the river down here. Made this nice fishing and boating area. We saw kayakers and rafters and all sorts of people along the river. And then we see this beautiful sandstone, and we're going to get right up next to it. There's a broader view of the valley, looking out that valley. So we're on our way. I think we're probably heading uphill here. So we're heading towards the screen. We were already down in this area. We've come through this, but 5 different canyons. About 3 of them look like this, and then 2 of them are more of a mountainous canyon that we'll see in a little bit. We started in Utah. We got to Colorado, and conveniently somebody decided to write Utah, Colorado on the rock, so we would know about what it was that we transferred from one state to the next. Otherwise, you couldn't tell because the scenery is just continuous like this. No towns. See how close we are to the rock. You see the rock fence is here. These are the communication lines. So these are not communications. These are all about catching the rock, or at least alerting the train that there could be a rock on their track because it came off the top of the cliff here. There's a lot of red rock. And some more, there's that weed covered siding. So there are a few, just not a lot of them along the way. We arrived at Grand Junction. It was the first actual town we had seen since we left Moab. We went by, you could see an interchange in I-70 that wasn't really a town, but there was some activity there. Went by a ghost town, they call it. It's basically just an abandoned bunch of trailers, but called a ghost town there. And then we pull into Grand Junction, and it's a full-fledged city with a beautiful station that's seen better days, but looks like some restoration work was going on. And this was our first look at civilization since we left Moab. There's the station. This was a Denver and Rio Grande station, undergoing some renovation, obviously you can see, and a couple other pictures here. But look at that right there, beautiful windows. Also had stained glass windows, but if I do a close-up of that, it says the main line of the Denver and Rio Grande. So a nice station, the terracotta tile style work. They were doing some work to get it cleaned up. Not completely unscathed with modern amenities. Here's the solar panels. So they were putting those on the Union Station of forget the Grand Junction. So I'm got my head out the window and I'm taking pictures and trying to get some good shots. And as I go by, I see this right there. And I'm always on the lookout for a narrow gauge. I'm in Colorado. I'm a narrow gauge modeler. And I think that looks like a narrow gauge boxcar. And the train is receding quickly from there. It's hard to see, but I'm checking it out the best I can. And sure enough, we get just far enough away, I can see it is a narrow gauge boxcar at some sort of an establishment. I have no idea what the establishment is, but it's across from the station. So I got to see a narrow gauge boxcar. Well, with the magic of the internet, I went on to Google Earth View and was able to scroll around until I got to the point where I could see DNRGW 3001, a narrow gauge boxcar with some sort of a platform connected to a standard gauge refrigerator car, I think, next to a building over here that was probably a restaurant. So I did at least get to see one narrow gauge car while I was in Colorado. We've gotten quite a bit higher now in elevation, and we started to open up this canyon. And this is where I was surprised to see some fields that had some wheat and some grazing for animals. Just a little bit different than I expected as we were getting into the western foothills of the Rockies. We arrived that night at Glenwood Springs. Glenwood Springs is a beautiful old town because there are springs there, hot springs. There's a great hotel that we were able to stay at. Some of the people on the train went to the hot springs. We chose not to but a very nice place. And here's our train pulled into the Glenwood Springs station. Rocky Mountaineer sign, they're waiting for us. Their staff came by bus, some of their other staff, and was ready from when we got there. Our bags didn't go on the train. They picked the bags up from the hotel we were in and put them in the hotel that we were going to, in the room that we would be in. So once we gave them our bag in Salt Lake City, they took care of it the whole time for us. It was very nice. So our first night in Glenwood Springs, there it is the next morning. It's a cool, crisp morning. Our hotel is literally a block to the right here of the screen. We walked across the tracks, across I-70, and right down into the springs where our hotel was going to be. If we would have had more time, there were a little bit of history displays in the station here. Unfortunately, didn't get a chance to look at those. There's a promotional view of that station with the Rocky Mountaineer sitting in it and the rest of the town around. Looked like a very nice place, would have been to spend a day, but that's just not how this trip happens to work. You get off at about 8 o'clock at night, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night after you had your dinner. And then you get back on at about 8 the next morning, 8:30 or 9 the next morning. And the first thing they do is bring you your breakfast on the train. So I said this was a trip that we took together. This is proof my wife's still having fun after a day on the train. So if you've got somebody that's not necessarily excited about going looking at trains with you, tell them about this trip, because it's a beautiful way to see some scenery and be well taken care of and ride a train and see a narrow gauge boxcar. Here's another valley view. And as we get up higher, the valley changed a little bit. Here's a guy fishing right down here. There are other views of rafters and kayakers on this portion of the river. Beautiful, beautiful scenery and nice wide vistas. Here's some more as that grazing area and the sagebrush. And we're going to be in this kind of a valley now for a little bit. Still opening up, but we're seeing the rocks going to start to change a little bit. And there we're into the next valley. It's a lot steeper. The sides are a lot closer in and a lot steeper. So we're going to start making our way into the true foothills of the Rocky Mountains now. See, the rock has changed. We're not seeing the red sandstones anymore. We're seeing basaltic rocks, seeing a much narrower river canyon, much steeper river, and the trees have changed to a much more familiar conifer that we're used to than the scrubs that we were seeing before. But the rock fence is still there. Some other neat details like retaining walls along here to try to keep the track up here where it belongs. Another view of the river getting smaller and smaller. As we get higher and higher, that river is going to get smaller, less tributaries feeding it. There was some maintenance work going on. Here's a Union Pacific maintenance vehicle happened to be here. As we were going by, there was some water recreation going on in here and stories about the different things that were along here. I don't remember all the stories that the different guides could tell us, but I believe this one had a water wheel and there was some sort of a small mill here at one time. Told you we were going to be reaching the Rockies soon, and all of a sudden they pop out into view the tops of the Rockies with the fresh coat of snow. What you don't realize is we've already traveled up to about 7,000 feet at this point, and the Rockies are now another 8,000 or 10,000 feet above that. You don't really appreciate that in this view, but we're getting way up there. And we managed to get into the snow. It didn't snow while we were in the train on the ride, but it obviously had snowed just before we had gotten there. And nice snow, nice view, changed the look of things, just made it a whole nother environment to look at with the green trees and the white snow on the tracks. And we were approaching Moffat Tunnel. Now, this is not a photo. I took this as stock photo, but some interesting here. we were in November, so we didn't get to see the beautiful yellow colors of the aspens. The friend that took the trip was in August, and the aspens, only a few of them had started to turn, but in many places there's deciduous trees right next to the tracks. So you couldn't see the vistas nearly as well as you could in November. So I'm not sure which is the right time to go on this trip. I think you can get different views depending on the time of the year. I really enjoyed the fact that the trees had lost their leaves and I could see the vistas more clearly. If you're looking to see the yellow of the aspens though, November is a little bit too late for that. So figure that one out on your own. I'm sure the Rocky Mountaineer people will be able to advise you on that too as they get more experience with this event. So here's what the inside of the Moffat tunnel looks like. And it's a long tunnel. It kept looking like that for a while until we popped out on the other side. And now look what's happened to our scenery. We have a completely different looking rock, completely different mountain trees. We've left the red sandstones behind, and we're going to go through what's called the tunnel district. 30 tunnels in 13 miles. So when I commented earlier about they don't know if it would be cheaper to build a short dome car or fix some tunnels, I think that's the reason why there's so many tunnels on this. Now we're on the east side of the crest of the Rockies to get down to Denver. 30 tunnels in 13 miles. And if I remember right, 28 of the tunnels were still intact. 2 of them had been daylighted. We're seeing a whole different looking landscape now. The water's going the other way. We're seeing these grays and blacks of the basaltic rocks and what makes up the Rockies and the metamorphic rocks. We're seeing layers of rock that have been uplifted. Just a whole different look as we popped through literally the Continental Divide. And we get up above the city of Denver. So way out here is Denver, and we're way up here. And they put this thing called the Big Ten curve. So the track goes off to the right, comes all the way back. Here it is coming to the left, making another big curve, and down into the city of Denver. So yes, you can have S curves. They are prototypical, and you can have them on a grade to get down to Denver. By doing this, they were able to limit the grades that the trains had to take to get up to the Continental Divide. Great big open prairie here, full of animals. Was also some military test areas. I don't know exactly for what in this area. We have this beautiful view of it as we're heading now into the Denver area. Literally dropped into Denver, into an industrial area. Had to pop a picture of that as we're just about done with our train ride. Just we're late in the afternoon on our second day, and hoping we would end up at Union Station, but no, they haven't got tracks that go to Union Station. We got off in an industrial area that looked a lot like this. Our bus was waiting for us. They took us to the motel that was very close to the Union Station. And that's where we spent this night. Coors Field was right there. It's been beautifully redeveloped all around Union Station and Coors Field. We were staying in the Raleigh Motel, Raleigh being a baseball term that I didn't realize what we were doing until I saw the baseball station, or the baseball stadium there. Nice courtyard. You could sit on the grass and watch the game if you couldn't get in, or other sports that they had on the largest screen TVs I've ever seen. You could get your dinner. We were able to spend a nice evening in Denver, and then the next morning, literally within walking distance of Union Station, to walk over and catch the Denver Metro that took us out to the airport. When Denver rebuilt their airport about 20 some years ago, they built it way out of town, which was smart because town has grown and got out there, but it took us about a 30-minute train ride on this light rail to get out there. So we got to go to Union Station. We got to see it just for a minute because the train was already there, and hop on, see Denver on our way out to the airport. So that's the end of the Rocky Mountaineer ride. But while I was down there, another friend was telling me about the Royal Gorge route railroad that they had taken. So here are some stock pictures from the Royal Gorge route. Let's see here. This is about 20 miles south of Denver that you start this, and there's the Royal Gorge Bridge. There was no room for the bridge, so they literally hung the roadbed over the top of the river here for a ways. Beautiful scenery also on that train ride. It's a round trip train ride with a lunch or dinner served, and my friends were able to do the lunch train. They did have dome cars on that train. They got to sit in the dome car, and that's the kind of scenery you get on that route. This is taken from a high bridge that runs over the top of the railroad, and for a price, you can walk out on the high bridge and look down and get pictures like this. So if you don't want to do the Rocky Mountaineer, there's this ride that starts and goes out to Parkdale, Colorado and back. Got to look back here. Oh yeah, Cañon City is 20 miles south of Denver. That's where the ride starts, goes out to Parkdale, Colorado, and then returns. So that is the end of my Rocky Mountaineer trip. We had a lovely time. I'd highly recommend it if you're looking for a luxury train ride. It's not Amtrak. It's sit back and relax and be very well taken care of, very well fed, and have a wonderful docent along the whole way to explain and describe what you're seeing. So I am going to stop sharing there. And there's still a few people left, and be glad to answer any questions about the ride if you open up your microphones.
Sure. Tell us about the cost, or if you don't mind. And was there different cost ranges between like first class and second class?
So there was a first class, second class. The gold leaf and the silver leaf, I never quite figured out what the difference was, because we were all in the same cars. We all got the same serving. So I'm not sure what the difference was, unless maybe it was the motels that they arranged for you at each end of the trip. We spent about $3,000 on the trip. So that included 4 nights in motels. It included the transportation. Once we got to Salt Lake City, all the transportation was included to Denver. And then we were responsible for our flight from Seattle to Salt Lake City and Denver back to Seattle. Another person I talked to wanted to ride from Denver to Moab, and they didn't have a good transportation system set up yet for how to get from Moab either back to Denver or over to Salt Lake City. So I'm sure they're going to be working on that. They just didn't have all the pieces in place yet.
When I was in Canada about 6 years ago, I saw the Rocky Mountaineer up there, and they had folks were hanging out the vestibules, taking pictures. Are you guys able to take pictures out that way, or is that a feature of this train?
No, the vestibules were open. The upper half of the door was open, and you could hang out as far as you wanted. And you could go to any car you really wanted to. We had great views from the car we were in, and there was vestibules on both ends of the car. So coupled together, there were 4 nice viewports, and the cars weren't that full of people. So there was really never too much of a crowd if you wanted to stick your head out the vestibule and take a picture. Well, Lisa, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you.